I'm Rick from Hand Tool Woodworking and Furniture Company. In our first series of videos, I'm going to show you how I start the designing process. Okay, we are right here at my drafting table. The first thing I do before I ever start drawing anything is I wipe the table down, I wipe all the tools down. And the reason for this is that, you know, with erasing and using graphite pencils and all this, it leaves a lot of residue behind. And to have a good clean shop drawing, it's imperative to make sure everything is pretty doggone clean. So I start everything out with that. All right, now this drafting table, I made it myself. You could buy one and that's perfectly fine. And you know, a lot of people just like to go straight to work instead of messing around with tools. I'm that way to a certain extent myself. There's nothing wrong with buying a drafting table. Nothing at all. There's nothing wrong with getting used to a certain type of tool. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Everybody has their preferences. Okay, I have my triangles and I have my T-square all wiped down, and I'll be wiping down my instruments as we go as well. All right, we're going to start out real simple and real easy. This is how I start my designing process. I always start at the drafting table. When I get an idea for something, as I start drawing it out, I really get an idea of proportion. I build it in my head as I'm drawing it. So I build it once when I draw it. Then, depending on what it is, I'll probably make a model. So I built it twice before I even touched the actual material. It's a money saver when it comes to materials, and it just ends up being a much better project. Okay, how I set that up was, there's two ways you could do it. One is you could set your paper up by the very edge of your T-square here. Okay. Now what I like to do is I just rest my hands on the T-square, which brings the wood part tight to the table, and I just move the paper into the wood. Then I tape down my upper two corners, because then it's kind of like sitting on a ledge there. Then just to make sure, I'll pull down and double check on the very edge of my T-square to make sure I'm dead on that paper. I'll tape down all four corners. Even when I'm using large trace paper that take up my entire table here, I still only tape down the the corners. There's no reason to tape down the edges. That's just a bunch of stuff that'll get in your way. Now there's a product called drafting dots. Those are much better than masking tape, but right now I'm in Korea, I'm not stateside, so the stores here tend to be specialty stores. There's not really a all-in-one store here like a Hobby Lobby or something like that. It's very specialized stores, and they don't have them everywhere. So, and Korea is small and big at the same time. It's small enough to where they don't have many chains, but it's also large enough to where Some stores you just can't get to them readily. My architect scale is imperial because that's how I work in the shop, and I do that with shop drawings. Now if I'm drawing something much bigger, such as I'm actually working on drawing up the plans for my shop and the layout and everything, because as soon as I get back stateside I get to build my own shop, and that's going to be amazing. Alright, I'll come 1/4 from the edge. Now I'll put my pencil down. I'm not making a tick mark, putting the lead of my pencil down on that 1/4 inch, and I'm turning. Slight pressure down. This mat I have on my table, it's a self-healing mat, and it's kind of soft. Now for the, I like to put my title block all the way along the bottom here. So I'm going to go up 1/4 inch from the edge. Then I like my title block to be a 1/2 inch. I'm going to come down my 1/4 inch from the top. Alright, by applying that slight pressure, what I just did for myself was I made a little divot. So now when I go back to it, I could place the graphite in my pencil. I could place the tip of my pencil in that divot, move my T-square to it. Don't try and place the T-square, then put your pencil across it. Okay, that's not the way to do it. That you lose accuracy. Place your pencil in your divot. Place your pencil on your mark. Move the T-square or your triangles to it. Much more accurate that way. Much more precise. The more precise we are on this table, on the drafting table, much more, is the more precise we're going to be when we get to the shop. All these habits carry over. If you get sloppy on your drafting table, then you tend to be sloppy in your shop, and vice versa. And as woodworkers, we're always in the search. We're always on the quest for perfection and precision. Now if you see, I'm not putting very much pressure on my pencil here. And I'm always dragging the pencil. I'm never pushing the pencil. I'm dragging the pencil. I'm putting very little pressure on it. You always want to use the least amount of force necessary to complete a task. Okay? If you're bounding down on everything, then you're using way too much pressure, way too much strength. And when you're using way too much pressure and way too much power, you lose precision. Okay, so my architect scale here, it is 1 inch wide, and I like to go 1 inch up and 1 inch in to start my horizontal baseline. Now I'm not an architect by any means. I took a few classes, drafting classes and stuff, and I decided to associate this with my design routine, and it's paid off dividends. I'm going to put my line all the way across my paper, almost to my border on this side. Okay. Then I'm going to come in. Now, when I'm working with this computer printer size paper, I tend to use my 45-degree triangle an awful lot. The only time I really use my 30-degree triangle, because it's longer and it's a little bit, I don't know, it's not as easy to handle and move around as this 45. It's shorter. And the 45 could reach just about anywhere on the paper. Okay, so we've got our horizontal baseline, we've got our vertical baseline. Now we're going to start off with something really simple, a square. We're going to do a 6-inch by 6-inch square. Okay, so on this one piece of paper, I want my front view, my top view, and my side view all on this same piece of paper. Okay, so what I need to do is figure out what scale do I need to use for this drawing, because I want it as big as possible so I can make it as detailed as possible, but I want it to easily fit on this paper at the same time. Okay, so if it's going to be 6 inches by 6 inches by 6 inches, we know 12 inches. Okay, right there. Now I want 1 inch space between my front view and my top view. So that brings me down to, that brings me to 13 inches. I want 1 inch space from the top of my top view to my border. Okay, so that's 12, 13, 14 inches. So we need to fit 14 inches on here. So half inch would put my 12 inches here. We need 14, so that's not gonna work. Let's check 3/8. That'll work. We will use 3/8 scale. Now what I'm gonna do on my piece of tape up here, I'm gonna write down 3/8 inch. That will remind me what scale I'm using. Okay, so I want to keep all my measurements on my horizontal and my vertical baseline. Okay, I don't want to try and make measurements all over my, all over my paper. I want to be able to easily reference all of my measurements. So now my tick mark on my 6-inch mark right here, that tick mark is actually smaller than the width of my pencil, of my pencil line. So I'm going to center the tick mark on my engineer scale on that line. I'm going with the pencil. Now I'm going to place the lead in the divot, draw me a line all the way across this way. I'm going to come back with my triangle. I'm going to draw me a line all the way down this way. Now the bad thing about this paper is when you go to erase on this regular type computer paper, it's gonna leave some marks. Alright, you see me repeatedly grabbing this brush. The brush is important. If you try to swipe with your hand, you're gonna end up smudging. Okay? If you try to blow it off, then you get little drops of spittle, little drops of saliva on your paper, and that's just not. Use that brush, and then the habit of using that brush will also carry over in the shop as well. I can't tell you how many times I've had hurt and messed up hands, splinters in my hands from wiping sawdust from my bench because I wasn't in the habit of using a brush. So I saved my hands an awful lot by using a brush. Okay. What I just did here was I just put my line for the 1-inch gap between the front view and the top view. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and 3/8 scale. I'm going to go ahead and mark my 6-inch. Oh, let me put it over here on my baseline. Go ahead and put my 6-inch mark on this top view. Okay. Done. Okay, so we've got the top view, we've got the front view right now. Now I'm going to take my 45-degree triangle, where in the upper right corner where those two lines intersect, I'm going to place my pencil. Right there, as precise as possible. I'm going to come right up here and I'm going to make me a 45-degree line all the way across that paper. Now watch this. This is really cool. This is really interesting. So remember that divot we made on the left side on our measurements. I'm going to place my pencil on that divot. I'm going to move my square up to it. I'm going to make me a line here. Up top, I'm going to move my T-square up to it and I'm going to make me a line there. Now with my triangle, I'm going to do the same thing here. Okay, where those two lines intersect on that 45-degree line, I place my pencil, I move my triangle to it. Now I'm just going to transfer that line straight down. Do the same thing here. And I'm going to transfer that line straight down. Alright, so now we got the front view, the top view, and the side view right here on one piece of paper. Too easy, right? Now, T-square. Let me explain to you some stuff about the T-square. Okay, if you're going to just draft with your T-square, it is not imperative that this be exactly 90 degrees right here. If you noticed, I left the head of my T-square to the left side of my table the whole time. Now, as long as I do that, I set my paper to my T-square. So I calibrated my paper to my T-square. So my T-square became the standard. Okay, so once I did that, it no longer matters if this is 90 degrees. Now what does matter is that your T-square be exactly parallel throughout its entire length. Because sometimes we use the top edge of the T-square to make a mark. Sometimes we use the bottom of the T-square to make a mark. So if your T-square isn't exactly parallel, that's going to show up in your drawing, and you're going to lack some precision there. Okay. The one I have here is just it's a 24-inch Stedler T-square, really cheap. I think I paid like $7 for it, brand new. The next thing I'm going to show you is this little doohickey right here. This is a lettering guide. Now, if your penmanship is absolutely atrocious, like mine is, it would pay off for you to get you a lettering guide. Because say you do this drawing now, then you write some notes on it, then a month later you go back to it. And with my horrible penmanship, I am not going to remember what the heck I wrote. So my chicken scratch is even hard for me to read. With my lettering guide, I'm using the holes along the left, and I centered it. I see the line in this hole, and I see the line in this hole, so I know that this is center. But I want those, I want that to be as big as possible, easily as reference as possible. So, I'll go ahead and make those lines as tall as that set of holes will allow me. Alright, so what I'm going to write in here is the scale I'm using. So then later on in the shop, I will be able to reference. And if I forget to put a dimension line, then I could just take any rule in the shop, measure it, do the conversion in my head, and I know what that measurement's supposed to be. Some of this I do freehand just to make it a little bit faster. And sometimes I jack it up and it looks horrible. Scale, I'm going to put my little equal mark. Equals. Three. Okay, now I've got two different erasers. This eraser here, the one we're all used to, that pink one, the Pink Pearl by Papermate, it removes a lot of graphite really fast, but it tends to leave a little bit of a mess. Whereas this one, it doesn't remove graphite quite as fast, but this one will clean up the mess that this one leaves. Okay, so that's why you'll see me using two different erasers. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm not using much pressure on this at all because in case I want to go back and do something else to this, which I do, I don't want to be putting so much pressure on this that it pulls it loose from my tape. And also, at Hill 303, that's an interesting story. If you have a chance, look up Hill 303 in Korea. You'll know the story behind that. But I'm right here on Hill 303. And they built some huge apartment buildings at the foot of Hill 303. So since they built those huge apartment buildings, now they have a problem with the water come down the side of the mountain up against the back of that apartment complex. So they're digging up, they're doing some work at the bottom of the mountain, at the bottom of Hill 303 to protect those people's property. Okay, new instrument. This guy is called a graphite holder. I'm going to grab a paper towel. Or a lead holder is actually what it's called, but we all know that's not actual lead, it's graphite. Okay, so I'm going to pull that out a little bit, and I got this little sharpener. Let me grab it. I got it out of my reach. You know, they've got this little screw here, and you can take the screw out and sharpen that blade. There we go. Now, a lead holder, very versatile, very useful tool. But you don't want to get that all over your drawing, so that's why I use a paper towel. Now the graphite will break, but I've got to pull it out to sharpen it, but I'll put it back in like that. Now when you're using this, you want this to be almost vertical, because the more horizontal it is, the less pressure it takes to actually break it. Okay. So try to remember to stay vertical, or it'll remind you, because you'll have to sharpen again. But sometimes you don't want a really tiny precise point. Sometimes you want a wider point, which is what makes this so versatile. Either one, you don't have to sharpen it as much, or you could turn around and take this, and I use this sanding block out of the shop. You can see I've done it before. You know, if I don't want the point so sharp, I'll just rub the point on the, you know, on my sandpaper there, and make it the width that I want. Okay, so now I'm going to take this, tip of my graphite, and see those dimples are still working for us there. Move my T-square to the dimple. Try to remember to keep my lead holder as vertical as possible. I'm going to take about 2 swipes on that. Then I'm going to go over before I even break contact with that T-square. I'm going to go over and put the bottom line on my other side. This is just darkening the outlines of my drawing itself. Now, I'm going to do my borders last. That's what I'm going to darken last. Because by the time I darken in everything on the drawing, that tip is going to be not as sharp, and it's going to be much wider, and it looks kind of cool when your lines for your border are bigger than the actual lines for the drawing itself. Try to remember to keep that lead holder vertical. Kind of hard to remember sometimes when your brain isn't specifically on that, thinking about that. Alright, a technique I use, if you see the skin on my palm right now, okay, I lift my palm up, then now you see the skin of my palm. I'm not pulling really hard, you know, against the head of my T-square, but just enough pressure there. I'm just putting a slight amount of pressure there to make sure that the head of my T-square is staying firm on the left side of my table. You know, I'm just enough to kind of pull my skin a little bit, just a little bit of pressure there. Alright, I'm still using those dimples. You know, just use the dimple where my vertical baseline met my horizontal baseline down here. You know, that's how I place my triangle. Okay, now dimension lines. I'm going to show you how I use my dimension lines. Now I'm still going to go back to that dimple. Watch this. I'm still back to that dimple. Now I'm going to leave about a 1/16 inch gap from the beginning of my dimension line to the, you know, to the actual drawing itself. See, I'm back in that dimple again. I just use it again, making those little dimples come in real handy. And then about halfway up. Now, you know, you could get real tedious with this, and you could measure and get your dimension lines super precise. And you know, when I'm doing complex stuff, I do that just to make sure that it's perfectly clear what my intention was when I drew it. And you see my little arrowheads there. Now I'm going to make my dimension 6 inches. Alright, now typically I use the left side, and I use, you know, I'll put my dimensions pretty much along my horizontal and vertical baselines. That's just what I typically do. But I don't think it'll hurt if you move this over to the right side, or if you put this dimension on top, or, you know, as long as the dimension's on there. You know, that's just the way I do it. So I'm going to go about halfway there. For my arrowheads. Alright, now this is all the dimensions you need, is along the bottom and along the left side. Because you remember we transferred this distance straight over to here. We drew this off of this. Alright? And then we drew this, you know, this dimension, we drew this off of this. Okay, and then we put that 45-degree line, then we transferred that off of that. So it is all transferred off of the, you know, off of the front view. Okay, so there's no reason to put dimension lines on everything. You know what it's going to be. Okay, now if you, like, say your box was deeper than it was wide, so your top view will actually be longer from here to here. Okay, then it would be necessary to either put dimensions on your top view or put dimensions on your side view. Okay, to where you know what that distance is going to be. But this square box, that is the only dimensions we need. Alright, now I'm going to use the dimples for my borders. I'm going to darken in my borders. That's the last thing I darken in. Make sure you don't tear your paper up with your T-square. I've done that before. Ruined quite a bit of work being careless, being reckless. Alright, a nice, clean, precise, technical drawing. Right there, all the dimensions we have on it. Didn't take us that long.